Once again, welcome to Building a Culture of Service Excellence, Lessons in Client-Centric Innovation. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Fernanda Correa. I'm Business Development at Spring to Innovation, and I'll be helping out with the webinar today. We hope you get a lot of value out of this session and enjoy the content, whether you're watching this live or on demand. In today's webinar, we hope you get some insights into what it takes to create impactful customer-centric programs and the challenges that come with such transformations. And to talk about service excellence, today we have Dan Batista. Dan is an executive advisor for the Institute of Citizen-Centered Service. He joined the ECCS in April 2015. He led a dynamic team that helps public sector organizations pursue service excellence through research, learning, collaboration, and professional development. Previously, he worked for the Government of Canada as a senior director, leading a number of innovative teams that provide services to small business and entrepreneurs, including the Canadian Business Network and BizPal. In 2012, he received the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, and in 2013, he was the recipient of the Institute for Citizen-Centered Services Ralph Heitzman Leadership Award for his commitment and leadership to developing and delivering client-centric service across all levels of government. And talking to them, we'll have Nilofer Erdebil, our founder and CEO of Spring to Innovation. She's a TEDx Ottawa speaker, author of the international best-selling book, Future-Proofing by Design, and has dedicated her career to assisting organizations in achieving remarkable advancements through design thinking principles. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nilofer to start the conversation with Dan today.
Thanks, Fernanda, and thanks, Dan, for being here. I'm extra excited to have you as a guest. Normally, we have a bit of an introduction session a few weeks beforehand with our guests, and Dan, I know we couldn't stop talking, so here's a chance to talk a little bit further and expand on some of the stuff that we chatted with. Before we begin, for those that aren't as familiar with ICCS, could you describe it a little bit and the role that you've had there and what you're doing now?
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. Wonderful to join you today. Thank you so much. Yeah, the Institute for Citizen-Centered Service, or the ICCS, or how it's referred to often as simply Citizen First, is right off the top, start with a not-for-profit organization, but it is a unique not-for-profit organization in that it was created by governments for governments a number of years ago, dating back to, I believe, 2005, 2006, when it was federally incorporated. Now, the reason I provide you with all this is because often, the organization is misunderstood. Like, what is this thing? Is it government? Does it belong to the feds, or the federal government, or the provinces? No, it's actually an independent, not-for-profit organization. Why is that important? Let me just take a minute or two to back up and kind of tell you how that all came to be. So basically, in the late 1990s, thereabouts, a group of senior officials, leaders in the federal government and across Canada and the provincial governments recognized the growing importance of citizen satisfaction, right? The notion of providing services that citizens felt they were really, truly getting value for. And what they did is they started informal gatherings, right? Because the idea was we can learn from one another. And of course, I'm sure that all the folks on today's webinar understand the pleasantries of this thing we call Canada and the federal, provincial, territorial, municipal makeup of or the architecture, if you will, of this country in terms of governance, which when you look at it from the perspective of a citizen or a client or a customer, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever, right? The division of certain powers and obligations and services. So when these folks got together, they recognized they needed to do more in common, right? To better understand how to be citizen-centric, right? And what they endeavored to do was to formalize the process of working together, right? And they did this for many years. And again, as many folks on today's webinar would know, it is a challenge to bring people together continuously in a way that actually leads to outcomes, to results. And the reason for that is people come and go. Governments change, priorities change, agendas change. So in those early days, they established two key bodies, which still exist to this day. One is the Public Sector Service Delivery Council, and the other one is, and these are, I apologize, they're a mouthful of words. The other one is the Public Sector Chief Information Officer Council. So acronyms, for those that love acronyms, the PSSDC comprises senior officials across all orders of governments in Canada who, as the title implies, are responsible for service delivery, right? And I'll spend a little bit more time on that and that group perhaps a little later in terms of research and the significance of that group. The other group, of course, are Canada's CIOs, which includes the federal government's CIO as well. And those folks started coming together because of the real challenges of providing the necessary infrastructure and platforms for delivery of services and to operate government in general. So these two bodies needed basically an organization that was ongoing, right? That could ensure the continuity of the groups, the priorities, et cetera, et cetera. And that's what eventually led to discussions about institutionalizing and having an organization that would sort of manage these councils, all aspects of them, because these councils are not legal bodies in themselves, right? So they needed a legal entity to manage them. In addition to that, in and around the late 1990s, as these leaders and folks like Ralph Heinzman, Brian Marsden, for example, at the federal level, were instrumental in starting to develop common approaches for measurement specifically, right? So things like the Common Measurements tool was developed, which basically is a standardized way to conduct client satisfaction surveys, which led to the evolution of an enormous data bank of questions that could be used by different governments and different organizations, right down to the program level. In addition to that, one of the key pieces that was missing was this sort of overview of how Canadian citizens felt about or how they experienced government services, right? From a holistic kind of collective point of view. In and around that time, they realized that, while everyone was doing something, it was very difficult to sort of compare results, to really look at a survey, for example, that was done in BC versus what might be done in Nova Scotia. So they created basically the Citizens First study in 1998. And that led to what today is known as Business First. And I'll talk a bit more about the significance of those studies. But all of that to say that the Institute then became basically the steward of these important early instruments for measurement and assessing performance, right? And determining key drivers of satisfaction. And all of this work led to really initial understanding of what Canadians expect from government in terms of the experience and, how much of a gap there was between the experience and the actual, the expectation and the actual experience. So that's really what got the ICCS rolling. And from that, it has really grown to be basically an interjurisdictional, a neutral interjurisdictional platform for governments to come together to have conversations about a lot of the challenges in terms of service delivery, right? And how to learn, collaborate, and move forward in a more unified approach. And again, I can speak to some of these examples perhaps a little further on, but that's really what it is in a nutshell. It was really a way to ensure that despite the fact that you're going to have leaders come and go, governments will come and go, that there would be continuity and an ability to sort of embody the growing body of knowledge, if you will, around the understanding of serving Canadian citizens and businesses from a government perspective.
I love that. And you mentioned There was also standardizations in terms of the way of doing client surveys. Are stuff like that still being handled?
Yeah, very, very much so. It still exists to this day, although it's become probably less used and I would say maybe a little less popular because of the explosion of data analytics, right? And certainly we can talk a bit more about that. But for example, the Common Measurements Tool, or the CMT as we refer to it, um, that exists today, but that has become CF, or Citizen First Analytics, which is an integrated do-it-yourself suite of tools, which allows you to uh, perform analytics on both structured data and unstructured data, right? And the structured part of that stems from the ability to use a common set of questions, right, for the purposes of measurement for surveying, which has been used and replicated not only across Canada but internationally as well. So yes, those tools are still used. Citizens First, um, believe it or not, 25 years now that Citizens First has been around. There's been 10 iterations, and I do apologize because I was executive director up until about 6 months ago. And Business First, I believe there's been about who I want to say 6 iterations of that study as well, because they're conducted typically every couple of years, given the size and the sort of requirements around carrying out that type of survey work. So
Yeah,
they're still there and still very much relevant and used. Yeah.
love that. Um, because you've had all this experience in seeing how service innovation is being done, when you think about service innovation, what would you focus on to enhance service innovation in the public sector and in the
hmm
private sector right now?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think and one that certainly will take more time than we have today. But for starters, I think, and again, this comes as no surprise, I'm sure, to today's participants. It is about understanding the needs of your client, right? It is about putting the citizen at the center of everything you do. And I know those are, words that we say. It's really how you integrate that into the way your organization behaves, how it acts, right? And what that means is that measurement is not a one-off. And when I speak about measurement and metrics, it is an ongoing. And again, in today's world, we've gone from conducting surveys annual basis or maybe twice a year to real-time data collection, right? And that ability to pull all that in, regardless of whether you're doing a traditional citizen satisfaction or a CSAT type survey, or you're using sentiment analysis from an interaction. The importance is you're collecting, right? You're pulling that in, and you're able to decipher and understand what is happening, right? And then act upon it. And I think that's why the ICCS has always been essential in terms of conducting research, not for the sake of just simply conducting research, but to provide insightful, actionable, options, if you will, from the work. So examples of that, as I mentioned off the top, the key drivers of citizen satisfaction. So what are those things? Well, they're things like timeliness, right? Resolution, right? Going the extra mile, for example, in terms of interacting with an official, be it on the phone or in person. All of these things we know have varying impact on the overall levels of satisfaction, right? So, focusing on those key drivers can result in improvements in overall citizen satisfaction. The other big one is, of course, service standards, right? And one of the things, certainly in my time as executive director, that I grappled with in terms of the work we did was the growing gap between what citizens expect, what they think they're going to get, versus what they actually experience. And I, unfortunately, will tell you that gap continues to grow, right? It's not shrinking, it's growing. Now, it's not simply as easy as saying, well, governments aren't doing a good enough job. Rather, I think it has more to do with the fact that citizens' expectations continue to grow exponentially because of the digitization, right, and the transformation of how services are delivered, namely in the private sector, right, and your ability to transact or interact and have immediacy in that transaction, that's resulted in that expectation that you can get something right away or to be done right away. So there are a number of reasons for that, but again, I think those are some of the key things in terms of overall innovation or drawing on kind of my years of being a fortunate observer of what's happening. What I can tell you is that those organizations that tend to invest in employees by way of training, technology, clear understanding of the role, right, and link back to mandates or what is trying to be achieved, results in higher levels of engagement in terms of employee satisfaction, right? And typically, the higher the level of employee satisfaction, higher there tends to be a higher level of citizen or customer or client satisfaction with services. So all of these things, it's kind of finding the right mix, if you will. It's not simply you need to do, you have to do CSAT or emotional or sentiment analysis. It is a complex kind of mix of the different pieces. It's really understanding, how to engage employees, how to ensure that they are able to bring about changes and innovate from their perspective as well, right? The last point on this, and I know I could, just keep pushing on this, but I think from my own personal perspective, the over sort of confidence we have the technology will fix things, right? This notion that innovation is technology, and it's not necessarily the case, right? I think, and we've learned over the years that it is the application of the right technology and the right amount that can certainly lead to innovation. But just assuming that the next great thing and is going to fix or make it automatically better is not necessarily the case, right?
Absolutely. And I think we've seen that a lot over the last, like for the last, at least for me, for the last 10 years in
Mm-hmm.
working with government, whether it's blockchain to data to AI as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you're absolutely bang on to, and I would definitely agree that there are higher expectations because of what people are seeing in their private life.
Mm-hmm.
And we do see in public and private organizations that the more engaged that employees are, the better the customer or the citizen experiences are. And so I think it's more helping organizations understand that
Mm-hmm.
language, that it's not, yes, we want to understand our end users, but it's also how do we empower our employees to make the best decisions for their clients
Right.
and ultimate citizens as well too.
Right.
And I know you've had a chance to work with provinces as well, and you certainly do a lot of reading and engagement in this area. Which provinces do you think are leading the way in citizen-centered services, and what factors set them apart?
Yeah, that's a very good question. One that could be, summed up this way before I get into the specific provinces. I think any jurisdiction where you see the following sort of components or ingredients, you're likely to see a higher level of innovation and satisfaction with services. And the first is leadership, right? There's no question that strong leadership, and I don't just mean at the very top, but I mean through an organization. You just referred to it, teams that are empowered, right? Empowered to make decisions, to be agile and responsive and nimble and all that, essential, right? I think organizations that understand, or sort of jurisdictions that understand, again, how to leverage technology, right, in the right circumstances, and organizations that are able to articulate, in such a way that their employees, that their teams understand what it is they're trying to achieve, along with investing in the training, right? And the training in such a way that it's not a one-off, right? That it is part of the culture. All of these things, and those are just a few that I reference, I find tend to become baked into the DNA, right, of a given jurisdiction and key organizations within it. So if you look around the country, I mean, I would say look at the coasts, right? So if you look at the government of British Columbia, they have been leaders for years, right? In terms of service and service innovation. And it stems with, starts with the articulation of, what it is they're trying to do and why. So they're very good at basically putting out strategic plans, but more importantly, like communications that tell citizens what they can expect and what they ought to expect, right? Uh, BC has been a leader for a long time. They've also been one of the most active jurisdictions when it comes to collaborating, working, partnering in terms of the ICCS and the councils that I referred to off the top. So very, very strong for a number of reasons, and certainly the work they've done with the BC Service Card and Service BC, just outstanding. A lot of training, for all their employees. So
Yeah.
definitely top of mind. I would
I will
also say, sorry, go ahead.
touch on something you said in there
No.
too, is uh, in terms of their strengths, they're putting forward their strategic plans and sharing them, but they're also and they're setting expectations, but they're also meeting those expectations.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what
Yeah.
makes it them able to meet those expectations really well?
Yeah, it's a good question. I would answer it this way. I think it's a sense of accountability, right? And it's not simply viewed from the perspective of meeting performance targets, but rather meeting the needs of citizens. So when you talk to folks from that jurisdiction, you get a sense that the culture has been absorbed, right? So there's like it's hard for me to sort of explain. You just feel it. You just kind of know that they're all on the same page, and a lot of it honestly has to do with. Uh, training that starts right at the beginning. So they've worked closely with the ICCS and they have developed a phenomenal training and development, sort of professional development program for anyone who interacts with citizens, with their clients, right? And I think that's where the accountability gets built in, right from the beginning. Not so much, and of course you've got, the more traditional sort of measures in terms of implementing and achieving and whatnot. But I really think a lot of it stems from that belief that you got to invest in the people, right? The people serving. So that's BC. I would say over the last number of years, Nova Scotia has also done some great things. Part of it came from changes in the machinery of government there and reorganization and the consolidation of basically digital services under Natasha Clark, who, again, an incredible leader, phenomenally strong, but again, was able to start building organizational culture, right, of putting the citizen at the center of the work they do, not just, looking at it from the perspective of the IT that, we need to have in place, but rather what is it that we need to do to meet the needs of citizens? And a lot of that is through collaboration, right? And working with citizens. So kind of bookending, I'd say those are two great examples of jurisdictions that have really sort of taken the lead, if you will. And then across the rest of the country, there are excellent examples. I'll point to up north, for example, Northwest Territories. They have done some great work, right? And a lot of that has come and again, I speak of this through our interactions with NWT in terms of again training, right, and bringing in sort of folks to talk about what it means to be client-centric and understanding how to design service standards, right, and how to base how to create those service standards on expectations and so these are all things that you see the effort um, places like Northwest Territories, Yukon as well. Other jurisdictions have done different things, right? They focus more so on things like, digital identity, for example, right? To create more of a seamless service experience, right? And the ability to access services securely and in a way that, suits the client. So Quebec is doing incredible work in that space, along with Alberta, for example. So there's a lot going on. But when you ask the question, immediately I went to kind of the culture,
Yeah.
right? And you can't necessarily touch it, but you can sense it, right? And I think those are certainly jurisdictions that exhibit a lot of that service culture, if you will.
I think you also nailed it earlier on in a previous question where you said that it's also strong leadership that is going to really build that culture, provide that training, and also enforce accountability
Hmm.
that those expectations are being met and always looking at things from a citizen
Hmm.
perspective. I know the US is doing a lot in terms of customer experience. Most of the departments have chief customer experience officers. What do you think we can learn from the US government's focus on the customer experience?
Hmm. Yeah.
Why they're doing it as well, too.
Yeah, well, I think, and this is something I alluded to earlier, and I think, and sort of in a lead up to today's session, I sort of refreshed myself on the executive order that came out, and I guess it was 21 by President Biden, the Customer Act, basically, and I kind of had a quick look at it, and what I immediately focused on was trust, right? So, and then I spoke briefly about this. So let me just take a quick step back. One of the things that Ralph Heinzman and Brian Marsden did, they did many wonderful things to get the ICCS up and running, in addition to the incredible research work they did. But certainly one of the things that stands out is this notion of the public service value chain, right? Which was a concept that they sort of put forward, which again is a very, very simple equation, right? What it says basically is that if employees are, engaged, they're empowered, they're trained, they have the right tools, they're likely going to provide better service, right? They're going to do that because we're humans. You feel better about yourself, right? You feel like, okay, I got this, I can do this. Um, if they're able to do that, chances are the overall level of satisfaction with a service or an organization, agency, institution, whatever, is going to improve, right? And in fact, they had worked it out that I think for every 1%, 2% increase in employee satisfaction leads to about 1% gain in citizen satisfaction. So this is going way back. We never kind of went back and redid this, but um, and from that, what that leads to ultimately, and this is the bottom line, in the private sector, you end up increasing profit, right? But in the public sector, you increase trust and confidence in public sector institutions. And I don't think I have to tell anyone on today's webinar how much of a challenge governments are having. You know, not even like holding on to trust, but like how low trust is dropping, right? And that is critical when you talk about democracy, right? And I know sometimes folks have said, off the soapbox, Dan, you don't. But when the passionate side of me comes out, this is fundamentally what service is all about. If you're not providing exceptional service, citizens, taxpayers are going to feel they are not getting value for their money. And worse, they're going to start thinking that they can't trust these institutions that are there to serve them. If that continues to happen, it does begin to erode at democracy, the fundamental tenets of what democracy is, and Westminster model of government in our case. So all of this to say, like, you can underestimate the importance of trust, and this is why I think in the U.S., especially in that executive order from 21, if you look at it, it is about ensuring that there is trust between the citizen and government. And, this is something that often we tend to not overlook, but it's kind of like, yeah, we get that because we get caught up in the user experience, the design, right? The task accomplishment. But all of these things are leading to something bigger, right? And that is that when a citizen interacts with government, that is a moment of truth, right? It is a moment of truth. Am I going to be able to get done what I came here to do? Am I
Yeah.
going to be able to get that done within the time they told me that I would be able to get that done, right? If you don't meet that and you continually fail to meet that, um, it is problematic, right? And you're seeing it, right? And you just have to look back to, hey, referencing the pandemic, but what governments were able to do in a short time, stand up essential programs, right, to help us get through that. The levels of trust and confidence moved up considerably, right? And certainly from when you look at sort of the political side and measurements of individual premiers and the prime minister, but we saw this in the Citizens First 2020 study. Initially, all of that was moving up, including client satisfaction or citizen satisfaction, the CSI index. Um, but towards the end of that study, those levels started to taper off and drop again, right? Because most Canadians started realizing, okay, a lot of great stuff was done here, but can governments continue to deliver on the promises they're making? And that turned out not to be the case, right? And of course, there's a whole bunch of other variables and factors that influence that. But suffice it to say that to me, that's what they're trying to do in the US. They're trying to get back to the core of what this is all about, and that is trust between citizens and government, right? Because of the belief that, government by and for the people, right? And I think that is, again, if you have a look at that, that is the fundamental tenet in that executive order. And that is really what I think a lot of their work is about, right? It's to ensure that that trust is maintained or improved, and certainly doesn't continue to decrease. But I'll leave it there because we can go in a bunch of different directions with
Actually,
the U.S. context.
with that though, I'm actually going to move us towards productivity, and I want to talk a little bit about productivity in Canada and what needs to be put in place to increase productivity and the relationship between productivity and citizen-centric services, because citizen-centered services also are about business-centered services.
Yeah. Um, Perhaps I can, well, let me kind of tackle that question and the parts of it this way. I am by no means an expert in productivity, certainly in the private sector, but I think I know enough to say that it is simply a problem that has persisted here in Canada, and that is underinvestment in technology, right? And ways to increase productivity, and largely technology, right? And the application of technology and the advancement. So again, not a surprise, right? That has a big role to play with it. I think, from the perspective of the private sector as well, it's innovation through service, right? And service offerings, right? And I think for the private sector, a lot of it stems from how personalized, how customized, how tailored can you make products and services for your customers, right? And I think Canada still lags and still has some challenges there. I think, and again, I don't want this to sound like I'm dumping on telcos or the communications infrastructure in this country, but we don't have a very competitive, telco space and whatnot, and so these things do have limiting sort of implications in terms of productivity, right? And the costs associated with what we have available to us. So these are some of the factors that I think the private sector grapples with, and I think, like the public sector, a lot can be done in the space of ensuring that what you create, what you produce, what you offer, is done in a way that is that meets the needs of the clients or citizens, right? And I think that you know, I put it this way, this it's not a day trip. Like it's a long journey and it's an ongoing journey. And to be honest with you, from my own experience, the work's never done and it's not ever going to be done because that to me is what innovation is, right? And I think, and this will sound unfair to governments, but having also worked in the federal government, for a long time and led numerous of online services. It is a challenge because of the mentality of how we think, and that is get it done and it's done and then move on to something else, as opposed to getting people to understand that that is continuous, right? It's just like how we do research, right? It's like it's how you measure, it's how you take all of that and continuously feed that back, right? So I think a lot of it is in part how we view this, in terms of it's something that has to get done, as opposed to this is what we do, right? This is the business we're in, right? So,
I'm seeing some shifts myself in
mhm,
aspects of that as more departments are starting to bring on product managers, at least
yeah,
in the government. But you're right, systematically, it is not ingrained in quite yet that
hmm,
have to continuously go back and take in some of the feedback that you're getting. Expectations constantly change, technology constantly changes. And so how do we look at things that this is what we do, constantly making sure that we're understanding those end users, bring that feedback in,
yeah,
make better services, and to
hmm,
allow for that innovation to happen consistently, regularly, rather than once every 5 years or 10 years,
right.
however long, if at all.
Yeah, yeah. No, I absolutely agree. And I think that is, I don't know if it's necessarily a Canadian thing,
Yeah.
but it is something certainly that I grappled with when I was an executive in the federal government, and getting senior management, ADMs and deputies to understand that, you know, you can't view these things as once and done, right? Like this notion of, and I'll go back, and this is, I'll date myself now, government online, right? If you look at the late 1990s and into, say 2005, six, um, a lot of success came out of that, uh, because of the governance and the apparatus and the dollars around that. Um, but at the end of the day, it was still viewed as get it built and it's done, right? And so, building a website, the thinking at the time, which I think is still to some extent there, was that, once you've got it done, it's done, right? And no consideration was given to rust out and content rot and content being trivial and all these things, and design and needing to, have iterations of a product, right? So again, well beyond, my ability to explain all this, but certainly, the ability to be agile, right? And really understanding that that means that it's never perfect, it's never right, but you're striving for that constantly, right? And
Yeah.
continually. That's a struggle, right? That's a struggle because everything is viewed from a project perspective, right? And the funding around that, as opposed to, like you said, product development, which is iterative, right? And so like it is happening. You're right. Like we're starting to see more and more of that, but I think that still plagues government. And again, not to pick on the feds specifically, but you still see it. It's pervasive, right? And I think that impedes innovation because it's not understood that that again is not something you got to get done. That is what you do, right? That's just how you ought to operate. But anyway.
I think people that are listening in on this webinar are interested in or are making changes too. So I think this is
Hmm.
just a bit more background for them as well.
Hmm. Yeah.
We are going to take some questions in a few minutes from the audience. So feel free to write in the Q&A any questions that you might have for Dan. Before we do that, I want to have at least one question in terms of innovation and service innovation. What have you seen as innovative in other countries for service innovation?
Oh, that's yeah, awesome question. It really varies. Like it's fascinating. And again, I was fortunate enough as executive director of the ICCS for nearly 9 years to interact with many governments around the world. And it ranges from you know, almost to the point of I don't know why it popped in my head, but a sort of command and control approach, right, to innovation, which very structured, right? Very sort of, this is how we're going to do it. We've got to kind of learn from the best, and then we got to take that and make it fit here and do that. So, hence the reason many of these countries reached out to Canada over the years, because Canada was seen as a leader. Probably not so much these days, especially with the UN latest UN report and us sitting, I think, at 47th or whatever it is, right, in terms of e-government rankings. But um, so you'll see some countries where it's institutionalized, so it's actually become part of their version of the school, the Canada School Public Service, for example. So if you look at Singapore. Again, city state, I know it's tough to like say, okay, well, how do you compare? But the level of effort, the investment, right, the focus is intense, right, in terms of service improvement in the public sector. You look at other parts of the world, again, a lot of interest in measuring levels of satisfaction, in moving towards more dynamic, emotional sentiment type analysis, right? Leveraging AI. So you're seeing that, you know, uh, places like Australia, for example, right, doing some interesting work there. If you look at the UAE, some of the organizations there, again, a lot of effort on institutionalizing service standards, right? Service excellence, right? So it really varies, right? And I think everyone tries to take approaches that make sense, right? Culturally and kind of relative to their own challenges. Trying to think offhand.
As you're thinking,
Yeah,
mentioned a
yeah.
couple of different things that in addition to that focus and actually taking drastic actions to make things more citizen-centric, especially places like Singapore, they're doing a lot of heavy adoption of
Hmm.
technology. I know they're leaders in IoT and smart city
Yep.
adoption as well. And you mentioned AI for sentiment in other countries as well too. And so it's not one or the other, it's the
Right.
focus, I think, on both that really creates these dramatic results
Hmm.
and, uh, and helps people do what they need to do to be focused on citizens and
Hmm.
be able to get that real-time data as well too, because IoT or Internet of Things
Yeah.
provides information from sensors in order to be able to give you additional insight
Yeah.
as well too.
Yeah, and I would just add to that. I think and again, comparisons are difficult because of the tolerance, right? So if you look at the use of AI in terms of capturing all kinds of data, right, from an interaction, for example, at an airport with an agent, or a kiosk or whatever, um, the degree to which something like that would be considered acceptable or doable in a Canadian context, um, it might be tougher, right, to say. But in other countries, those approaches are being taken, right, with regard to how to capture data, right, to improve service. I don't know that we're there yet, or we're going to get there, but there is, you're right, a strong leaning on technology to be able to do a lot of this type of work. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. Um, if you don't mind, I'm going to switch over to the Q&As.
Hmm.
I have a couple questions that have come through. So there's one in the Q&A right now. As a manager in government services, what practical strategies can I implement to inspire my team to innovate and think creatively while navigating the constraints and challenges unique to the public sector?
Very good question and a very difficult one to answer. I'll tell you how I did it when I managed teams. Um, I really saw my role as providing cover, right? And what I mean by that is, first of all, again, these things you all know, get the best people possible on your teams, get the diversity you need, right? Get the different, skill sets that you need. Whatever mix you can get, the better off you will be. There's no question about that. I did these things probably without knowing. I certainly wasn't bright enough or aware at the time necessarily what I was doing, but I was able to surround myself with exceptional people that had the right skills and abilities. And what I did is I basically told them, go figure it out. right? And I know this is it may not sound practical today, but basically what I said is, okay, here's the problem. This is what we're trying to solve. What can we do, right? My job as a senior executive was to basically give them and empower, certainly empower them, but give them the space and the cover for them to do things they need to do. And my job was to make sure that what needed to get done, back to, accountability, performance, measurement, or whatever, um, that was taken care of, right? And then when we were ready, I would bring those shiny objects out, right? And I would take them and say, hey, the team's been working on this. This is what we can do with it, right? So, that was what I did. Now, in terms of, I think the question was around like what strategies. I don't know if it's strategies per se, and I don't know that, you can get people feeling, comfortable unless they feel safe, right? And feel like they can actually be creative because everyone can be creative, right? It's in people, right? But I think when people feel like whether or not it's the case, there are restrictions or impositions, right, on them that can limit really their ability to be expressive and to say, okay, this is how we might be able to do this. They won't, right? So you do have to create safe, healthy spaces, right, for people to feel like they can um, be creative, right? That from my example. Now, again, that sounds simplistic, but honestly, I do believe this. A lot of this stuff is not, complicated. Now, that doesn't change the reality of like how you do procurement, right? Or how you get the dollars and how you account for it and how you know, that's always going to be there in the public sector. But I think if you can build teams and they feel that they are safe to do the things they need to do, they're going to. They're going to create stuff. So just surround yourself with, good people, right? And good people want to be in places like that. Like they want to feel like, okay, this is a place where I can come and do the things that I feel can make a difference and contribute. So,
Yeah, I love that. It's creating that safety for creativity, for experimentation, and to think a little bit outside of the box.
hmm
Sometimes a lot outside of the box. And I really do feel like we're in a time where we're going to be forced very shortly to think quite differently about how we're delivering
hmm
services to citizens. And that provides opportunities, but a lot of um,
right.
uncomfortable feelings as well, too, because it will be quite different. And so I
hmm
think
hmm
providing the skill sets to the people that are doing the work and giving them the accountability, I think that's going to be phenomenal.
Right.
One other questions that I wanted to ask you, and so this is around some of the research that you've done in the past. So
Mhm.
do you recommend using citizen first data for benchmarking? And could they search for results from other regulatory agencies to build their comparison sets?
Yeah, so in terms of Citizens First, so just a bit of so Citizens First provides a high level overview of how governments across Canada are performing, right? So it won't do the deep dives necessarily that you may be looking for in this case. And the reason I flag that is that there are two components to Citizens First. There's the national study, and then there are the jurisdictional studies. The jurisdictional studies are basically paid for by the jurisdictions that partner with or participate in the studies with the ICCS. So those folks get to see those results. Now, we at the ICCS see those numbers, so we can tell you who's best in class when it comes to the various metrics and who has the best client satisfaction index, et cetera, et cetera. But we don't publish that, and I should be careful. I'm still with the organization as an advisor, but not the executive director, but they don't publish that. If you want to get to the level, now you can reach out to the ICCS and ask for some assistance on this. But the best way to benchmark is actually using the common measurements tool. Well, part of it that I didn't speak to is that You have the CMP or CF Analytics, which allows you to run your analytics on data, both data that's captured, structured from the use of the common questions, or unstructured data. So text, right? So any feedback that you get, the qualitative stuff. But using CMP or CF Analytics allows you then to benchmark, because we do have data within the ICCS going back a number of years, different sectors, different organizations, that allows for comparables. So you can see how your organization is performing vis-a-vis similar like peer organizations in other jurisdictions. So it is available, but it's more through the use of the CMT, which is more of a micro tool. It's more precise because it's at a program or a service level typically. So, but I'd be happy to follow up. It's Dave McVetti. I know Dave. So there you go. So if you want to reach out to me, Dave, I can talk to you more about this and maybe get at what you're hoping to find. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much, everyone, for your questions, and thank you, Dan. Before we finish things off, I'm going to pass it back over to Fernanda, who's going to go through some information. And if you do have more questions for Dan, you can reach out to him. You're available on LinkedIn, and if you want, we can actually add more contact information, or Dan, if you want to put your contact info in the
Yeah,
chat.
sure. Yeah, for sure.
And Fernanda?
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Dan and Nilofer, for this talk. It was amazing. And yeah, so just thank you everyone for joining us today. Hope you found it valuable. And we have a webinar coming up in December about employee experience. You'll get the link for that along with the recording for this one. That would be also a very interesting one. As we mentioned here today, it all starts with the employees, right? And having the right space for them so they can provide a better citizen experience. So for those who may have joined later or wish to revisit any part, we will be sending the recording along with additional resources that were mentioned. And we would also love to hear your feedback. So when you log off here, there will be a survey. So we appreciate if you could take 1 minute to answer that. It's a very brief one.
One more thing, Fernanda, too, is for on slide 8 too, is that we do have a Deeper Clarity LinkedIn network. And so if you are interested in that, you can sign up for the LinkedIn group, where you can actually put in any questions that you might have or post anything that the community might be interested in. It's open to both private and public sector. But it's a lot about sharing information and knowledge and being around like-minded people that are looking to innovate services and service design. And again, both private and public sector. So if you want, feel free to join the Deeper Clarity Network. And we'll also be posting about future webinars on there too. And thank you, Fernanda. Thank you so much, Dan. And thanks everyone for
Thank
joining.
you.
And we will see you in another month for the employee experience sessions. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
You.